In early 2016, I was working at a Christian women and children's shelter in my college town. I was just out of college and my boss was only a couple years older than me. One day in her office, she frustratedly began recounting a conversation she had with a more liberal family member. She had discovered a totally new concept in that conversation, or at least one that was totally new to her. It was very troubling. Stressed and defeated, she looked up from her desk where her eyes had thus far been locked, and over at me. She asked, "Have you ever heard that there are other books that didn't make it into the Bible?" "Yeah, non-canonical gospels and all that," I tried to say as gently as possible. See, I had just become an atheist hardly a month prior, and I knew that if anyone at work doubted my Christianity, I'd be fired immediately. I almost was fired for believing in evolution, actually. I couldn't take the chance of coming off skeptical of the Bible as she knew it. My boss replied, "No one ever told me about those. Did anyone ever teach you about them?" "No," I honestly answered. "Then how did you find out about them?" she asked. "I just read about them online," I admitted, not willing to give up too much information. She leaned back in her chair and threw up her hands and said, "Why wouldn't anyone teach us about this crap as kids? I'm not even going to look it up. I don't want to know anything about that. I just want to live my life and love Jesus and not be worried about all of that." I knew exactly how she felt. I had felt the same fear for months before leaving the faith. Sitting in her office at that moment, I understood that she was at a crossroads I had encountered months before, except where she had chosen to simply believe, I had decided to learn instead. To those of you who have made that choice alongside me, I'm glad that you're here. Now that I don't limit myself in what I can learn about, I find a lot of happiness in learning about the things that I missed out on growing up. Think evolution or non-canonical gospels. It's almost like I'm gaining secret knowledge that allows me to transcend into something more. More on that later. So since a lot of us, myself included, are so cooped up at home that we're missing haircuts and having to change our hairstyles to compensate, I thought that it would be fun to try to spread some joy and some religious literacy by telling you all the story of perhaps the wildest gospel not included in the Bible, the Gospel of Judas. A bit of preliminary information: the Bible is a collection of multiple different books written by multiple different authors across well over a millennium. That said, the books that make up what we now recognize as the Bible are called canonical, as they make up the biblical canon. Today, some different sects of Christianity have slightly different biblical canons from others, but the vast majority of books that exist within one contemporary version of the canon exist in all others. This hasn't always been the case, though. There are a lot of books in the Christian mythos that were never accepted into the biblical canon. The Gospel of Judas is one of them. Our story begins as far back as 180 CE with a Christian church father named Irenaeus. In his work, which translates to Against Heresies, he wrote about a Christian sect who believed that the disciple Judas betrayed Jesus because he had secret knowledge about him. Irenaeus said that those in this sect produce a fictitious history of this kind, which they call the Gospel of Judas. Yeah, calling it fictitious outright seems a little odd by today's standards. Maybe it's a little harsh, but something we have to remember is that the scholarship of that day was very different. Irenaeus was a heresiologist. In the very title of his field lived a dedication to orthodoxy, an indication that it was not the study of what theology existed, but a study of theology presumed to be wrong in light of the one true theology, Irenaeus' own. Unfortunately, for centuries, writings like this were all we had on the Gospel of Judas. At some point several centuries back, the book itself was lost. Lucky for us, though, it was found again in the 1970s. Back then, treasure hunters found several ancient-looking documents in a cave in Egypt, including the codex which contained the Gospel of Judas. In my opinion, they did miss a serious opportunity by not pulling a Joseph Smith and just starting a whole new religion by claiming to be able to translate the documents with a magic rock and a hat. But instead, they decided to sell their loot to an antiquities dealer in Cairo, Egypt. The dealer, Hana Osable, put the text up for sale for $3 million, but never found a buyer. So in 1984, he decided to store the ancient, delicate texts in a safety deposit box in Long Island, New York. They stayed there for 16 years, disintegrating in the humidity of the area. 10 to 15% of the manuscript we'll cover here was actually destroyed in this time, unfortunately. In 2000, Frida Nussberger Chacos, another antiquities dealer, bought the texts and got them to manuscript conservators who could actually preserve them, luckily. Finally, in 2006, National Geographic published a translation and pictures of the rediscovered Gospel of Judas. It was translated from the ancient Egyptian language of Sahidic Coptic and dated to the 3rd or 4th century. This means that if it's the same gospel which Irenaeus spoke of, the version that we have is probably a 3rd or 4th century copy of a text from the 2nd century. Given all that context, it's obvious that it was not written by the long-dead Judas. Now, I know what you're probably thinking at this point. That's cool, Drew, but what does it actually say? I hear you, so I'm going to read through portions of the text which I'd like to focus on here. It's about to get pretty weird. One day he, Jesus, was with his disciples in Judea. He found them sitting together practicing their piety. When he came up to his disciples sitting together praying over the bread, he laughed. The disciples said to him, "Master, why are you laughing at our prayer? What have we done? This is what's right." He answered and said to them, "I'm not laughing at you. You're not doing this because you want to, but because through this, your God will be praised." They said, "Master, you are the Son of our God." Jesus said to them, "How do you know me? Truly I say to you, no generation of the people among you will know me." That's pretty strange if you've ever read the canonical Gospels. Apparently, this Jesus thinks that not even his own disciples know who he truly is. Also, what's up with him saying "your God" to his disciples as if they're worshiping something other than him or his heavenly Father? When his disciples heard this, they started to get angry and furious and started to curse him in their hearts. But when Jesus noticed their ignorance, he said to them, "Why are you letting your anger trouble you? Has your God within you and his stars become angry with your souls? If any of you is strong enough among humans to bring out the perfect humanity, stand up and face me." All of them said, "We're strong enough," but their spirits weren't brave enough to stand before him, except Judas Iscariot. He was able to stand before him, but he couldn't look him in the eye, so he looked away. Judas said to him, "I know who you are and where you've come from. You've come from the immortal realm of Barbelo, and I'm not worthy to utter the name of the one who sent you." I told you this got really weird. It's apparent the narrative here is totally different from anything in the canonical Gospels. First of all, the disciples are painted very negatively. They might not even be worshiping Jesus at all, but some other god. Judas is apparently the only one of them who actually knows who Jesus is and who sent him to earth. Secondly, with that realm of Barbelo comment, I think it's safe to say that this gospel's understanding of the structure of the cosmos is pretty different from that of the canonical gospels. We'll pick the story back up days later in the narrative. Because there's a lot of extra details here and a few places where the text was damaged enough to lose a few words, I'm going to editorialize just a bit for clarity. Another day, Jesus came up to them. They said to him, "Master, we've seen you in a dream because we had great dreams last night." And they said, "We saw a great house with a great altar in it, and 12 people, we'd say they were priests, and a name. And a crowd of people was waiting at the altar until the priests finished receiving the offerings. We kept waiting too." Jesus said, "What were they like?" And they said, "Some fast for 2 weeks. Others sacrifice their own children, others their wives, praising and humbling themselves among each other. Others sleep with men, others murder, yet others commit many sins and do criminal things. And the people standing before the altar invoke your name, and in all their sacrificing, they fill the altar with their offerings." When they said this, they fell silent because they were troubled. Jesus said to them, "You are the ones receiving the offerings on the altar you've seen. That's the God you serve, and you're the 12 people you've seen. And the animals you saw brought in to be sacrificed are the crowd you lead astray. It's been said to the human generations, 'Look, God has accepted your sacrifice from the hands of priests.' That is the minister of error. But the Lord who commands is the Lord over everything. On the last day, they will be found guilty." Alright, that's a pretty graphic image. Jesus says that the disciples will lead people astray in his name and will be unknowingly serving a different God, one that delights in degeneracy and violence. It sounds like Jesus is even saying that ritual sacrifice isn't right and that those who have been relying on that for communion with God or salvation will be punished for it. Next up, Judas also has a vision. Judas said, "Master, just as you've listened to all of them, now listen to me too, because I've seen a great vision." But Jesus laughed when he heard this. He said to him, "Why are you all worked up, you 13th demon? But speak up, and I'll bear with you." Okay, what in the world does 13th demon mean, and why would he call Judas that? Well, when we get to the part where they discuss cosmology, pay close attention. It'll all be explained by the end. Judas said to him, "In the vision I saw myself. The 12 disciples are stoning me and chasing me rapidly, and I also came to the place where I had followed you. I saw a house in this place, and my eyes couldn't measure its size. Great people surrounded it, and that house had a roof of greenery. In the middle of the house was a crowd. 'Master, take me in with these people.' Jesus answered and said, 'Your star has led you astray, Judas, and that no person of mortal birth is worthy to enter the house you've seen, because that place is reserved for those who are holy.'" Just for time's sake, I'm going to be skipping a few lines here. When Judas heard this, he said to him, "What good has it done that you've separated me from that generation?" Jesus answered and said, "You'll become the 13th and will be cursed by the other generations and will rule over them. In the last days, they'll blank to you and you won't go up to the holy generation." I could be wrong, but I think that generation here could mean realm or plane of existence. So Judas, like the other disciples, isn't going to go to the holy place in the last days either, although Jesus says Judas will become or dwell in the 13th realm and rule over the 12 disciples, and maybe the realm of humanity in general. Next, Jesus tells Judas about cosmology, and it gets crazy. It's actually such a long and complex description of reality and the origin of the cosmos that I'm going to whittle it down to just a couple of necessary details. Read this on your own if you'd like to. Jesus said, "Come and I'll teach you about the mysteries that no human will see, because there exists a great and boundless realm whose horizons no angelic generation has seen, in which a great invisible spirit which no angelic eye has ever seen, no heart has ever comprehended, and it's never been called by any name." So there's a realm that not even angels have seen, where there's a great spirit which mankind doesn't even know about. That's not the Christian God. Is the Great Spirit greater than the Christian God? If we keep reading, we find the surprising answer to that question. I'll summarize because this section is long and pretty confusing. The Great Spirit creates several great angels who create angels and powerful beings of their own. Eventually, after dozens of powerful beings come into existence, something totally shocking happens. And look, from the cloud there appeared an angel whose face flashed with fire and whose likeness was defiled by blood. His name was Nebro, which means rebel. Others called him Yaldabaoth. And another angel, Saklos, came from the cloud too. So Nebro created 6 angels, and Saklos did too, to be assistants. They brought out 12 angels in the heavens, with each of them receiving a portion in the heavens. Then Saklos said to his angels, "Let's create a human being after the likeness and the image." And they fashioned Adam and his wife Eve. Yeah, Saklos, this being that's definitely not the most powerful being in the cosmos, is the creator of mankind and the God of Christians and Jews. He also came from the same cloud as a being called a rebel, and his name, Saklos, scholars actually say means fool. Suddenly, everything just makes sense. Jesus laughs at the disciples at the beginning because they're worshiping the foolish god Saklos. He says they're going to lead people astray in his name because the disciples think Jesus is the son of their god, but he's not. He's from the realm of Barbelo, a place far beyond the realm of Saklos. The god of the world is Jesus' enemy. Saklos delights in debauchery and violence, which is why he commands bloody sacrifices. Honestly, from a non-Christian's perspective, I have to say that this makes all the evil and suffering in the world make a lot more sense. God allows suffering, he commands holy wars, and he demands sacrifices because he's just a heartless fool who enjoys violence. Jesus has nothing to do with this God in this text and is on earth in opposition of him. Finally, we come to the end of the story where Judas' so-called betrayal of Jesus takes on a different meaning. Then Judas said to Jesus, "What will those do who've been baptized in your name?" Jesus said, "Truly I say to you, this baptism which they've received in my name will destroy the whole generation of the earthly Adam. Tomorrow they'll torture the one who bears me. Truly I say to you, no hand of a mortal human will fall upon me. Truly I say to you, Judas, those who offer sacrifices to Saklos, blank everything that's evil, but you'll do more than all of them because you will sacrifice the human who bears me." Immediately, there was a disturbance among the Jews. Their high priest grumbled because he'd gone into the guest room to pray, but some scribes were there watching closely so they could arrest him during his prayer because they were afraid of the people since they all regarded him as a prophet. And they approached Judas and said to him, "What are you doing here? Aren't you Jesus' disciple?" Then he answered them as they wished. Then Judas received some money and handed him over to them. So Judas appears to betray Jesus, but is it really a betrayal? Jesus knew it would happen and he allowed it, so was it part of his plan to oppose Soclos? What does Jesus mean when he tells Judas, "But you'll do more than all of them because you'll sacrifice the human who bears me"? There is a lot of negative rhetoric toward the flesh, humans, and mortals in this text, so maybe Jesus saw being separated from his human body as a good thing somehow. I think we could better tell if Jesus thought well of Judas and his betrayal if we could figure out if Judas' fate as a ruler within the 13th realm is a reward or a punishment. Here's my final insight into this story. Remember back when I read this? And look, from the cloud there appeared an angel whose face flashed with fire and whose likeness was defiled by blood. His name was Nebro, which means rebel. Others called him Yaldabaoth. And another angel, Soclos, came from the cloud too. So Nebro created 6 angels, and Soclos did too, to be assistants. They brought out 12 angels in the heavens, with each of them receiving a portion in the heavens. This is the dividing of Soclos and Nebro's portion of the heavens into 12 realms over which they rule. So does that mean the 13th generation or realm where Judas will be sent is the realm of Soclos and Nebro? The realm of the foolish, terrible god and his double, the devilish, rebellious god of flame and blood? If it is Judas in for the worst damnation of all the disciples, or is he to ascend to godhood himself? Does the secret knowledge which Judas now possesses allow him to become something greater, or is it just a curse? I don't know, and I think that's a question for scholars of texts like these. If you'd like to read this gospel for yourself, and I recommend you do, there's a link to the translation I used in the description. I won't make many claims about what this text teaches us about Christianity as a whole or anything, because I'm not a scholar of religious studies. I will, however, make a few points that I think I, a layperson, am still qualified enough to make. 1. This text shows us that Christianity was not united in its theology immediately following its inception. We often hear that this denomination or that denomination is closer to the early church than any others, but to that I say, which early church? There was never a single theology from which all Christian sects sprung and splintered off of. Christianity was diverse from the very beginning, and the only reason we think otherwise is encapsulated in my next point. History is written by the winners. For a long time, the only things we knew about the Gospel of Judas and those who believed it came from people like Irenaeus, who opposed them. Is it any wonder that we've had less trouble finding the texts that those like Irenaeus upheld and more trouble finding those they despised? It's because by might, popularity, luck, or some combination thereof, those who upheld the texts we've always had won. They gained power, so they wrote the history we learn in our religious Bible classes. Imagine how much richer a history we'd have if all Christian sects were able to record their perspectives too. Finally, here's my obligatory point as an atheist and skeptic. Given that from so early on in Christian history, theology and practice was so varied and divided, the idea that God has made his message clear is just absurd. As early as the 2nd century, Christians already disagreed on the fundamental points. Who is God? Who is Jesus? How do we worship? Is there an afterlife? What is the afterlife like? Those were all points of disagreement among Christians long before any contemporary Christian sects took shape. It doesn't seem like God cared to make things very clear, so what was the point of sending Jesus at all? It's apparent to me, at least, that God probably didn't have anything to do with the genesis of Christianity at all. I hope you all enjoyed listening to this story as much as I've enjoyed telling it. It's important for skeptics to be religiously literate, as it's a necessity for anyone who aims to confront falsehoods propagated within religion or keep us from propagating myths of our own. It also helps us to understand how lore and tradition change over time, how history is written, how religion shapes society, and vice versa. The understanding of all these things adds up to a better understanding of the nature and story of humanity. As skeptics, I think it's vital for us to strive toward that understanding, study of religion included. Thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. For those who want to learn more about this story and those like it, I've created a playlist mostly consisting of videos from my favorite channel, Religion for Breakfast. There's so much fascinating stuff I couldn't cover, so I think you'd really enjoy checking out those videos. As always, check out my Patreon, follow me on social media, stop your sacrifices to Sawcloths or else, I don't know, you'll burn for all eternity? We didn't get to the afterlife stuff. I'm not really sure what's going to happen, just don't do it. Until next time, stay skeptical.